Good morning, everyone. um, it is a pleasure to see some of your smiling faces. And for those of you who have your cameras off, that's okay because it is a delight to see your name, which means that you're taking the time to show up. My name is Evelyn McKinney, and we are thrilled to have each and every one of you kick off the Rural LISC 2021 pre-seminar session this morning. Our session today is titled Rural Works, Igniting Workforce in Rural Communities. I am a program officer here at Rural LISC. I work on the economic development team, and I'm really excited that I get to be the first person to welcome you to the next few days of wonderful presentations, lots of information, great networking opportunities, and just general overall connection as we come together for impact in rural America. I would like to quickly run through our agenda for today, introduce you to the visionary behind Rural Works, and then I'm going to hand over the reins so you can hear from him exactly what that journey, how it was manifested, and what it looks like today, how Rural Works and workforce development is driving systemic impact for rural workforce development, and also like why it is so important for this investment to be made in rural America. So let's get started. I'm actually going to share my screen, so just a moment. All right, looks like we're cooking with grease. So I think this slide was supposed to be up at the beginning, but I'm not being paid for my technical abilities. So welcome again, and we'll just move right on forward. So my colleague is going to kick off this morning. He will share an overview of Rural Works, how it fits into our Rural LISC framework. Then we will move into a discussion about Rural Works, a local workforce solution with a national footprint. We will take a deeper dive into the theory of change behind Rural Works, learn more about key drivers and how the local collaboratives, our boots on the ground partners, how they are catalyzing change through meaningful activities, and so much more. Conference attendees, please pay close attention. In the lower right-hand corner of your screens, there is not only the chat function, but also a Q&A box. We would love, as we are moving through the material today, if you have any questions at all, please lift them up by entering information in there, and then we'll check in a bit later with our colleague and address some of those key questions which have been asked. Also, we are so excited about workforce development. So excited that it couldn't just all be done in one session. It needed to be done in multiple sessions. So this morning we're going to meet. Then this afternoon we're going to have a smaller meeting with our boots on the ground partners. But then on Wednesday, we are inviting you to all join us at 11:30 a.m. CST as Justin is going to again dig deeper with some partners about workforce supports in rural communities. So mark your calendars. I'm now quickly going to just read to you all of the great things about one of our leaders on the economic development team on the rural LISC team as well, but also just to let you know how great and wonderful and how thrilled we are that we have this type of leadership. So Justin Archer Birch, he is the Program Director of Workforce Development at Rural LISC. He is the former director of programs for the Delta Regional Authority during the Obama administration and was previously the director of the Delta Workforce Funding Collaborative as the Community Development Associate at the Foundation for the Mid-South. Justin was a fellow with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and has been featured in several national workforce development publications around the intersection of community development and philanthropy. I read the slide to you because I couldn't have written it any better. Justin has really devoted himself to this work. He is immersed in community impact. He is immersed in collective impact, and his resume speaks volumes to where he started and where he's headed. And we are thrilled to call him colleague and friend. Justin, I'm going to now pass the reins over to you.
Thanks, Evelyn. And what a hype man or hype woman. I have to really appreciate the call out there. And I just want to throw it back at you. I know everyone who's been in the Rural Works National Community of Practice really appreciates the hard work Evelyn brings every single day, but also the charm that she brings and always the fun and lightheartedness part of this conversation. So let's first and foremost start off with recognizing our sponsor. And I'm sorry, is anyone else getting a ding? I think we might just want to put, let's see. Oh, I'm not sure what this bell is. You got to love a virtual setting. Let's see if we can't figure that out really quick.
I think it's from people going on the chat. That's what it is.
Let's see really quick. Bear with us.
Is it quite possibly if through the platform, if we marked for on the agenda, to give us a notification for the meeting, because a thing just popped up on my web browser saying, hey, meeting is starting now. That's not through Zoom, it's through the again, the whole platform, if you added the session to your schedule through the platform.
Got you. Let me try this, and if everyone will, just give me a thumbs up if the sound stops. And sorry, we are running through technical issues in real time. All right, so why don't we just continue on? So as everyone knows, if you want to go far, you go alone. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And we could not do that without one of our signature sponsors. The Syndium is the real reason why this work was seeded in 2020. And they usually want to shuffle off the praise, but we're going to lavish it on them this morning. So we are fortunate to be joined by Kristin Yeto. Kristin, do you want to take a moment and turn off mute and just maybe meet and greet everybody?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Hi, everybody. My name is Kristin Yeto. I'm a program officer with Ascendium Education. I am so thrilled to be joining this session. I've been in conversation with Justin and the Rural LISC team for over a year, talking about the really wonderful work of Rural Works. We at Ascendium are committed to improving post-secondary and workforce outcomes, particularly for learners from low-income backgrounds. I work in our newest portfolio of work, which is entirely dedicated to improving opportunities in rural communities nationwide. And Rural Works was one of the very first investments that we made in this portfolio of work. We know that Justin and the team bring incredible expertise and commitment to this. And so I am thrilled to be learning with and from all of you. And so thank you, Justin, for the opportunity to join in today's session, and really looking forward to virtually meeting all of you and hoping that we're able to meet in person in the near future.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. And I know the sites, as much as LISC, really appreciates the meaningful impact y'all are making in rural. The second person that we want to just acknowledge and thank before we move forward is our Rural LISC Director and Vice President of LISC, Kate Kane. Kate, do you want to address the crowd?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Good morning. My name is Caitlin Kane. I'm actually based in New Orleans, Louisiana, but we're all coming at you today from New York City. Not exactly the traditional rural backdrop that we're all accustomed to, but with this new virtual environment, we're pivoting as the needs require. But thank you so much for joining this afternoon. And thank you, Kristin, from Ascendium and for Ascendium's consistent investment in workforce development efforts for rural communities. The work of Justin and the broader workforce development team through Rural LISC has just been incredible. We've really seen coming out of the pandemic just how important it is to have these sort of collaboratives and to really have the opportunity to drill down and connect. So really hoping over the next few days that we'll be able to do just that. I know that we're not in the ideal environment being virtually connected. We would all have loved to have been in person in Memphis, but we are holding out hope that we'll be able to connect in person next year. But regardless, I hope that y'all have had an opportunity to at least visit the VFairs platform and check out the various chat features and other ways to connect with us throughout the next few days. But it's great seeing all of your faces. And for the faces that I can't see on here, really look forward to being able to connect with you again throughout the week. But if you have any questions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to reach out and chat with us over the next few days. But with that, Justin, I'm going to give it back to both you and Evelyn to take us through the remainder of the curriculum.
Thanks so much, Kate. And Kate will be speaking more to the general audience in tomorrow's session. So we look forward to that conversation to come. All right. Let's begin to talk through Rural Works. So when we originally began to design this session, we were hoping to be in person and to provide some really targeted TA and capacity building to the members of our local rural workforce funding collaboratives. But as we pivoted to a virtual session, and really appreciate everyone's grace as we build that out, we really just wanted to be able to also tease it out to a general audience who had workforce development interests. So for those of you who are joining today, we really hope that you'll come back Wednesday and join our workforce session, which will include the Markle Foundation and the partners at Rework America Alliance, in addition to Walton Family Foundation. So shameless plug, they'll be joining us then to talk a little bit more through their theory of change and how we plan to integrate that into the current rural work model. So let's just start off with a little bit of background information about Local Initiative Support Corporation. Sorry, we're always dealing with our fun technical issues. There we go. So we really see that there are 5 pillars of rural community development. Those are access to capital, broadband infrastructure, disaster response and resiliency planning, and placemaking inclusive of affordable housing. But today we're going to concentrate on workforce development, which is one of the central pillars of our strategy to drive technical assistance and capacity building support to local communities across 50 states and 2 U.S. territories. So to overview a little bit of our conversation today, we're going to be talking through growing rural industrial partnerships in America, how we complement our workforce programming and how we stagger it at LISC to offer integrated service models, how those programs can work together and separately, but also our commitment to a diverse rural economy. So let's begin a little bit with what's the challenge in rural America and then how we see our vision and approach to those challenges. So we often hear the different things about rural America and how they get stigmatized. We hear about that slower employment rate that happens in rural communities, these inequities in post-secondary education, which really drive it between the rural and urban divide. A lot of the employers like to uplift their difficulty in hiring and how there's a lower workforce participation rate. So let's take a second and pause and let's just throw a couple out there. Let's spitball from some of these rural workforce collaboratives. Does anyone else want to elevate what they see as a challenge in their community? I will shamelessly popcorn. How about Will Coppage?
I knew that was coming. That's why I was reading over the slides. You know, I think the biggest thing with the employment is that we know that there are jobs available, careers available, and we know there are folks that want those careers, but the gap seems to be kind of a base level of training to enter into those jobs. Most of the time in rural areas, it's a generational workforce that has been used to maybe a lower skilled manufacturing type job. And now as we're moving forward, we're seeing that as the gap. So how do we now get people to understand the importance of taking that 6-week basic training type class to build a ground level or a palette that all the worker or workforce employers in the community will desire. So I think that's one of our challenges right now, is conveying that message of that gap.
Yep. Yeah, I think I heard a couple of things there. Silver tsunami hitting rural America extremely hard. There being a sort of skills gap. Also, how do we sort of train for that? You know, is there this concentration at employers that builds enough incentive at a post-secondary provider to actually offer that training? We're seeing a couple things pop up in the chat here. So some of the common things: housing, transportation, childcare, you know, all of these really feed into each other of how do we provide those social support services to ensure that rural workers can actually go get the education and training they need to then go retain employment. Does anybody else want to talk? How about we shoot over to, I see Juanita Woods. Juanita, how about you elevate? What's a couple things maybe down in Monroe, Louisiana?
Good morning, everyone. It's
Good
good
morning.
to
I knew you'd
see
bring a fresh
everybody.
perspective on a Monday.
Yeah.
So what are some of the challenges you're seeing in your community?
Well, you know, and I was looking in the chat and I had unmuted myself to say one of the major challenges outside of the skills gap is transportation, because what we found here in Louisiana is that you'll have companies, because we have that Delta region. So we've got the river and we've got, you know, but the challenge we have is being able to get the people, once they're trained, being able to get them to the job site. So that has been a major challenge for us. And we've been working with that for a while. And then definitely housing. But what we're starting to see is that in some of the areas that we're serving, we're starting to see housing development starting to pop up. But the transportation is still a challenge. But we've got a couple of community colleges in the areas in which we're serving. And so they're getting on board to start to provide that skill set. But transportation is still the challenge right now.
Yeah. Thank you for elevating that. All right. So, you know, we always hear the stigmas, we always hear the challenges, but we just really want to make sure that we're focusing on rural solutions and opportunities. You know, I think we're talking through that. So what are these things we know that are happening, and how can we sort of fix it? So we know that rural communities across the country, you know, are driving innovative changes and solutions. They're identifying those gaps. They're developing the systems that are needed. They're securing that workforce funding and partnership, and they're formalizing new structures to the benefit of workforce development. We see a huge vision. We really feel like there was a lot of need in this space for a national intermediary to sort of step in and figure out how we could better aggregate those national best practices that was happening in each one of your communities and pulling together some of those resources so that we could pipeline those into community trust organizations. So I want to talk a little bit about our approach, and specifically our approach that's been developed under Ascendium. So talking through our model a little bit. So when we came on board, the first thing we wanted to talk through is seeding workforce funding collaboratives at the local level. And we started that with an original 11 sites. So we brought in the groups in rural America that we thought were really sort of shovel ready to take this on, that we knew could leverage it with private philanthropy. We owe a Title II. They could do it with federal resources. So we started out with an original 11, building those out. And our model sort of broke up into 3 years. We're currently building out year 2, but let's start with year 1. And that was really this idea that we were going to move into a discovery phase. So what we initially asked all workforce funding collaboratives to do was to set MOUs into place that pulled together work-facing organizations and post-secondary institutions as the backbone. But we really were prescriptive on them having a couple of key partners, but then wanted to see what worked in their own community. So every group needed that 501c3 nonprofit that was really going to think through those social services and what were those supports that rural workers need to stay in this system. Everyone needed a post-secondary provider that would offer training and education. But more than anything, we said that there had to be some industrial partners and employer partners at the table. So each collaborative has a minimum of 2. And we were shocked to find out that most collaboratives that came to the table ended up having somewhere between 10 to 15. So it was great to see those sort of industrial partnerships formalized in rural America. The next thing we asked them to do was align. So we wanted a backbone to start convening and start to getting all the partners to coordinate around common needs and what those employers really were talking about, where it was creating a skills gap, or we wanted those nonprofits to be able to talk through the opportunity gap. We wanted post-secondary institutions, God love them, who always sit there in the middle and try to figure out that conversation somewhere in between, to be able to elevate across a collaborative of how they could align strategies and funding. So we're starting to move in a little bit of year 2, and let me back up here. So that's sort of this development phase where we're looking at each one of the collaboratives to build out what are these sort of pathways, what are these on-ramps and off-ramps around certain careers that we can all build a supportive system around. And then what does that job profile look like on the back end? And then we're helping rural communities promote that partnership and those opportunities to the community at large, not only for this pipeline of skill seekers, but also for employers to really sort of make it seamless, this idea of needing livable wage employment, traveling through education, and then seeing them move into a livable wage position from that standpoint. Next year is where we're really going to start to dive into more of employer co-impact. And what we mean by that is having employers invest back in the system. So whether that's their knowledge trust, whether that's training and education, maybe it's equipment, maybe it's them changing their own employment practices to be more equitable towards the rural job seeker. So that's really the model that we're talking about building out, and then layering in other side approaches as we see people come pull their chair to our table. We really felt like there was a strong need here, and I think we'll dive into that a little bit more in the Q&A, but this is the model that we're currently testing and then elevating our findings to the field. So Rural LISC just released our white paper on year 1. If you go to our website, I'd love to drive people there to our rural work section so you can be learning with us. Ascendium has also been elevating that to a wider market. But also we are just one of several of their grantees who are thinking through how we solution these problems in rural America. But there's some really excellent findings from all of their grantees in year 1 that we also just want to elevate as partners in this work. So one of the things I wanted to spend a little time with in talking through our workforce funding collaboratives that have been set up is where LISC is sort of going. So I always use a hockey analogy for those of you who know me. We're trying to look at where the puck is going rather than where it's at today. And Rural LISC really sees this need to launch a sector strategy. So we have been pulling data in and trying to figure out, like, what are the 7 sectors that our workforce funding collaboratives are actively participating in, and where can we sort of lay in not only funding, but capacity building support to drive these sectors in rural America. So first and foremost, we're talking about rural. Historically, culturally, we can't leave out agribusiness. But the conversation that we're having today is very different than the conversation that we're having in the past. When we're talking about agribusiness, we're now looking at people with strong minds and not necessarily strong backs. And I think that's the difference when we're talking about this sector in rural America. It's one that we see growing. It's one where we see a new demand for a new type of employee and a new person to enter into that labor market. Today, we're looking for those people who can fix an automated machine that can sow an entire field in 2 days. We're looking for that person who can problem solve on computers and analytics, that maybe can think through a feeding program or a watering program. So we have solutions where we are investing in the technical assistance and the education to that local farmer to increase the efficiency and cost savings that are vital to the family farm to stay up to date on those current trends. We know that the local rural farmer is having a hard time right now dealing with corporate farms, and there's lots of TA and capacity building that we can layer in there. We also see a real need here with the growth of the Latinx community in rural places, that's really what's driving our population growth. So how do we layer in for these sort of migrant workers that are coming in, that are seasonal? How can we take those skill sets and transition them to other sectors where they might be able to piece together year-round employment and livable wage opportunities for them and their families as they become more and more part of our communities? Technology. So we're starting to see a lot of technology investment in rural places. Not only these sort of explicit tech employers. So we've been very fortunate to see investments in rural America from groups like Google, Microsoft, IBM for our Louisiana collaborative. But tech is one of those things that's going to underpin every job as we move into a 21st century economy. So we're really trying to think through how we're going to embed digital upskilling at the K-12 and the post-secondary and incumbent worker level to simultaneously build out access broadband infrastructure that might solve our solutions for the future. And this just tells you a little bit more about how we're doing that. So at the back end of this program, we're also going to be elevating one of our programs, Digital Navigator, and how they're using things like North Star, Google Career Certifications, and Microsoft Learning Pathways to think through that sort of flex code job. Hotel, retail, and accommodation. So we were reading a report yesterday just from Airbnb about they've had their best year ever in 2020 and 2021. And some of the analytics that came out of that really show that people are choosing to recreate in rural America. In fact, there was a 32% increase last year. But hotel, retail, and accommodation is one of those things that really drives rural economies. We are a unique place, and it's a unique opportunity to capitalize on America's recreation habits as we build out those stronger economies on Main Street. We see an opportunity to make rural places a top-tier destination. So, whether we're talking about, hiking in North Dakota, whether we're talking about, swimming in the panhandle of Florida, we know that people are coming to rural places to recreate, and we want to make sure that we are a top-tier destination for that. Some of the ways that we're investing is working with Walmart to increase the literacy, the numeracy, and those digital skills that are needed. But also, how do we use hotel, retail, and accommodation as sort of that gateway pathway into some of these other sectors that might pay a more meaningful and living wage? But what are the opportunities here, especially for some of our more marginalized workers like Opportunity Youth in rural America, to sort of set the table and then move them on along a pathway? Advanced manufacturing and skilled trade. So rural America has been more than fortunate as we are seeing people start to reshore back to the US. And they're coming to rural places because there's smaller overhead. There's more access to natural resources, whether that be land, whether that be water. And we're beginning to have the sort of strong labor pools that they're looking for in advanced manufacturing. So we are making strategic investments in there. So foster these work-based learning and registered apprenticeships programs in manufacturing, skilled trades, and energy. That's one of the places that we're really sizing as a lot of opportunity to build the capacity for local workforce systems to really be able to connect into some of those federal sponsored apprenticeships. Energy and renewables. So roughly 1 in 10 of renewable jobs are in rural America. So what we're doing is we're partnering with local groups like TVA, Entergy, Georgia Power, to think through how we better invest in energy efficiency, advance electric grids, to make sure that the people have those sort of short-term skilled credentials that they might need to think through our energy infrastructure as we're moving forward. Healthcare. This is another huge opportunity for rural places and a place where we also see a lot of gaps between what's needed and what's there. Today, only 11% of physicians that are in the United States are in rural America, and we're 20% of the population. So how do we grow that? Even some of these entry-level tracks, like we're making investments, I know in Elkins, West Virginia, of some of these entry-level careers, whether it's phlebotomy, maybe it's CNA, but ultimately something that can move workers along an incumbent worker track that really helps us fill the gap of not only the physician, but the nursing shortages that we see within the healthcare industry. Also, rural is a conversation about transitioning economies. We have traditionally only been a one sector, depending on where you're at. Maybe that was agriculture, maybe that was advanced manufacturing. But what we see in the Delta South is that labor markets are shifting away from agriculture in some places. And then maybe in the Northeast, where we see a lot of ex-urban communities, it's shifting away from an advanced manufacturing economy to one that's healthcare based. But how do we upskill that population to meet the demands that are in it and create a more equitable, healthy labor pool and talent pool for that sector? Transportation, distribution, and logistics. So I think this sector really talks about that interdependency that happens between urban and rural communities. Urban needs rural, just like rural needs urban. Every day, commodities and goods have to move from rural places to urban spaces. And when we talk about that employment pool, right now, we need the CDL drivers. When we talk through ports, I think that's another conversation that we are strongly having within the maritime industry. Most of America's ports actually exist in river systems in rural communities. But what are some of those short-term skills, whether it's moving freight, whether it's doing logistics, that we can prepare rural workers for today for the jobs tomorrow? So that kind of talked through our main 7, and I just want to take a pause to sort of test or have a mini focus group here. Do those 7 track? We'd love to hear a little bit of feedback from our communities at large. Is there anything that you feel like is missing that you just want to conversate on as we think through launching a sector strategy in rural America? All right, I will popcorn again if I need to. How about we go to Jennifer Griggs?
Hello, Jennifer Griggs with Highland Community Builders in Elkins, West Virginia. I think you really have hit what we need. I like to see the focus on the CDL and transportation and logistics. I think that's the most difficult one for us to be able to pull off in our rural community for a variety of reasons. One, we have a lot of justice involved individuals, and justice involved individuals are going to be really limited on what they can do for transportation. The other is just the fact that I'm still learning about the new regulations for CDL that's coming up next year, but I think that's going to have a big effect on CDL drivers. And the schooling that's required is a significant amount of schooling for someone. I think it's, a month and a half, like full time. And so how do we supplement someone's wage if they're wanting to go to that school during this time to get that better wage? I mean, that's a real critical question. On whereas some of the other ones, you might be able to do some workforce training like we're doing in our healthcare. We have our healthcare classes at night so people can work a full-time job and take these classes. So I think some of it is pivoting on how we can do some of these trainings into more workforce trainings that are not full-time.
Sure. All right, thanks for that. How about we go to our New York neighbors? Patricia, how about these 7? Do they track? Anything you would add?
No, I think that they are right on target. And one of the things that we did discuss is the transportation. And I have been trying to figure out a way to do wheels for work so that when we have job ready participants, the ones that have gone through training are really excited, it doesn't get halted in that there is no mass transportation, or they don't have a valid driver's license. So it's just gonna be repetitive. They get pulled over because they're driving a car. You know, I mean, it's so many things. And one of the things that I was gonna put in the chat is there's different components to transportation. So I think just looking at that, transportation being a barrier in itself, but what are the underlying other issues that could be a part of that situation? And I think for what we have been seeing is individuals have tickets that have piled up. We can't assist with those. We can't help them pay them. There is no pot of funds. Individuals don't have valid driver's license because of those tickets, or they don't have real reliable transportation. So if they live in the rural area and we're trying to get them into a manufacturing job or a healthcare position in the urban area, how do they get there? We've even worked with Rochester Regional Transportation Department to see if there could be a limited bus line going out there. And they think that there is not enough interest, but you won't know because you're not out there. So I think some of those conversations need to continue, and funding needs to happen so that we are able to start that process as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Patricia. All right. Anyone else before we move on?
I'll add a comment, Justin.
Yeah.
I think it was Jennifer who was talking about with CDL, some of the barriers is serving the Justice Touch community. And that's also exists, or we found out because the healthcare sector is so large in our community. And so some of those have provided barriers just because of the past record. Luckily, I think because of rural community, you know, and Angelica Moten is on the webinar here, or the seminar here, the personal relationship in a rural community with applicants. So that part of mentoring that she does can help steer people into other career pathways. But I just wanted to say, just same as CDL, healthcare has some barriers as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Will. So now that we know that, I think we're going to be reaching out to each workforce funding collaborative. I know as you're building out your pathways, and we'll talk through a little bit more of these 7 and how we can refine them. But very interested in everyone's input as we begin that launch. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the LISC programs that we like to embed in some of this systems level thinking to really help us make transformational change, especially at that sort of client level. First and foremost, I think everyone knows LISC Financial Opportunity Centers. So if you haven't, please feel free to ping us. We're always happy to connect people in with our FOC department. But Financial Opportunity Centers is LISC really offering an integrated service model using workforce as sort of the backbone and the sort of core pillar. So FOC clients are 50% more likely to land that well-paying job than people receiving employment services alone. And it helps with long-term job retention, which we define as holding a job for a year or more. Looking to the side here, it just sort of tells you some of the things that we offer to our FOC clients. So everything from career coaching, job readiness, job placement, that access to education, training, and bridge programming. This is sort of our model when we're looking to get that deep sort of equity reach. So they might not necessarily always be that sort of middle skill person, but maybe that person who's just starting to enter into that pathway. But we know in addition to those employment services, they're really going to need financial coaching. So to think through, like, once you get that livable wage, how are you going to budget? How are you going to balance sheet? How are you going to improve that credit and sort of FICO score as we think through maybe economic asset building? So there's people who, you know, start with a bike, but eventually want to get to a car and a mode of transportation. How do we help you align what you need to in your life to get to that point? Also, we have to always talk about income supports. So oftentimes when we're coming to the table needing employment, we're also needing access to some of those benefits that can support us and our families as we sort of leave that job and think through how do I take this 6 to 12 weeks to go get this training? What is sort of that sort of plateau that I can climb that will help support me as I'm sort of walking through this sort of vision and dream to my own career? So financial opportunity centers also offer what we call bridges to career opportunities, where we work with localized industries to build out that targeted curriculum, especially that contextualized math and literacy component, and those soft skills and those foundational trainings that really help people enter into what we would consider entry-level or gateway employment. So this just builds a little bit more into what some of those employment services are. So we address that academic readiness. We focus on those growth industries that are linked back to our sectorial strategy as we're looking for employment partners to attach to bridges. We make sure that it's really tied to what that industry needs. So working with them to really sort of feel what they see as their skills gap within their local system. And then we have that integrated with core FOC services, which we just talked about. Digital navigation. So this is a program that was recently started by our colleague, Kristin, and has rapidly grown and really sort of not only elevated to the field what's sort of needed, but is filling some of those gaps. So as we said earlier, digital is going to be that thing that underpins no matter what job you go into. So whether it's hotel, retail, and accommodation, whether it's agribusiness, whether it's healthcare, there's going to have to be a baseline of digital literacy there. So she really works to build out that access to digital skills training. She assesses those clients' needs and where we can fill in. And then we advise on, for free or affordable home internet service options and how they can actually access a device. One of the things that we are really excited to start talking about this year is our commitment to a remote workforce. So this is actually originating from our LISC director and VP, Kate Kane. So remote work will transform economies in unprecedented ways. We're already seeing that today. I'm sure all of you who are doing this in the field know this. Today's workforce requires that high-speed internet connectivity and digital skills, especially in rural America. And we are committed to advancing digital programs and policies that reduce access to barriers, preventing a rural worker from realizing a higher wage and quality job employment. We all know that Toyota might not launch the new, plant in our community that's going to hire 6,000 people. Not every community is going to get a PACCAR that comes in and hires 5,000. So we really have to start thinking through what is this flex code work where a person in Abena, Mississippi or Tuttle, North Dakota can work for an employer that maybe doesn't exist there, but pays a higher wage. And I think there's some really interesting statistics that are off here to the side. There's 91% growth in remote work over the last 10 years. And according to a report by Upwork, some 73% of all companies have remote workers by 2028. We're seeing that catalyzed further by COVID today, so we're very interested in where this goes. We also think that this is an opportunity to re-attract people back to our rural communities. How many of us have lost workers to some of these tier 2 and tier 3 cities? I know people in the Delta often talk about, the sort of brain drain to places like Memphis and Nashville. When we look at the Northeast, we see people going to places like Ohio and Boston rather than being able to stay in their rural community. Our West Coast folks, how often do we see people leave the Central Valley for places like Los Angeles or the Sun Belt for places like Phoenix? We feel like this is a real opportunity to not only retain our workforce, but hopefully attract some back. Small business support. I love the first line in this, and I just want to repeat it again. Rural places still build their economies on Main Street. How true is that for everyone? Can I get hands raised? If you're in a rural community, jobs come to Main Street. Large-scale employers are only a piece of this puzzle. We really have to solution workforce development for the mom and pops, the people who are employing 2, 3 people. 97% of employment in rural America can be directly linked back to small-scale employers and businesses. So our recently launched video network where Evelyn, who you saw at the beginning of the screen, her and our colleague Beth are really begin to vision that out and how we further support those entrepreneurs who are driving innovation and employment in our rural communities. So I want to talk a little bit about how these programs work together. So they can exist separately, but what we really like to do is layer them in to where we're providing like a holistic support to a local community and a workforce funding collaborative. So we're going to build out those career pathways. We're going to meet with those employers. We're going to make sure that this is industry led. We're going to support the development of those pathways and equip communities with the tools they need to support those employers, training partners, and workforce. On the client level, we're going to be working with those people who are unemployed, low skill, who have the extensive barriers. We want to go there with an equity approach in rural America. We want those people who are motivated and determined to do better. We're also going to layer in these financial opportunity centers to workforce development. We want to make sure that everyone has access to one-on-one financial and employment coaches, and that we're addressing the barriers that keep them from participating in their employment systems. We're going to work with those bridges to career to make sure that we're offering those contextualized math and literacy supports. We're going to make sure that the digital supports are underpinning all of it. And lastly, with Rural Works, which we're here to talk about today, we're going to make sure that we're investing in systems level transformational change that ensures occupational training programs are directly aligned with what those employers needs and ensures that there are jobs available for trainees after graduation. I want to just pause really quick and just see if there are any questions from the chat that want to talk through a little bit about how these models might work together. Seeing as there are none, we're just going to keep going. So we want to really talk through our commitment to our communities. So a competitive and a sustainable workforce is inclusive of empowering and always learning. An equitable workforce system is one that identifies and solves for those unique needs of both workers and employers in urban and rural geographies. So we want to work with two major stakeholders within the system. One is that job seeker. We are committed to strengthening individual economic opportunity. We're going to connect rural populations, especially those that are underrepresented and marginalized. Women, BIPOC, Native, veteran, returning citizens, opportunity youth. We all want them to be able to connect in with workforce training, broadband connectivity, and livable wage employment. The only way we get to scale in rural places is by diversifying our rural work system. And especially in the communities that we work with in the initial 11, we wanted to make sure that it was where rural intersected with those marginalized and underrepresented populations. Next is that rural workforce system. We want to work with employers within the ecosystem and work across groups and sectors to improve regional workforce cohesion that results in greater access to quality jobs for rural residents. I just want to end this Prezi today by saying that we really appreciate everyone joining. We wanted to talk through a little bit of our vision for the next year and the future. We want to ensure that every single one of you feels like you have a voice in where we're going, and that LISC is very committed to elevating your voices to the national level. As always, and it's corny, but it's in the name, we believe in localized solutions. And as a national intermediary, we want to do everything we can to ensure that what's happening on the ground in your community is successful and that those successes are being elevated to the field at large across rural stakeholders. So if you have continued questions or comments, or you'd like to see how you can further engage with us at Rural Works, by all means, feel free to reach out to Caitlin Kane, our LISC Vice President and Director, or to me, who's the Director of Workforce Development. Our contact information is there in the chat, and feel free to connect with any of us at any time. So at this point, I think we're going to pivot back to Evelyn for some Q&A.
Justin, I hope that you have some water handy, because you have certainly given us so much information. So sit back and take a quick sip. I'm going to check in quickly with our colleague, Julie. I'm not certain, I don't have the ability to monitor to see if anyone has used the Q&A function. Certainly we see a lot of information coming across the chat, but let me check with Julie quickly. Julie, any questions that have been raised?
Evelyn, there's no questions so far.
Okay, that's all right, because the chat function has been on fire. And I think what's really exciting about it, Tracy Prince, you shared a couple of really interesting pieces of information, an article, as well as Section 5311, which I didn't dig very deeply into while Justin was speaking, but I know that we'll be able to share out all of the information that you've shared. Dana Espinal, who is out of Port Arthur, Texas. Good morning. Dana is new to our business development organization network, but works with small businesses in the Gulf, down on the Gulf. And then also was able to see that there are some, oh, good morning, Ana Maria Cintrón from Causa Local in Puerto Rico. So a lot of information being transpired through the chat. But since no questions have been asked, and since Justin needs a quick break, I'm going to open up the floor. And does anyone have a question or a comment that you would like to relay? And if so, let's give Justin a small breather.
Hi, this is
Go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry. This is Jennifer from Highland Community Builders in Elkins, West Virginia again. The question that I have, and we're real excited to be working with Rural LISC and all the different programs, is we're seeing an uptick in people who are coming into our learning center where we provide our education that lack their GED. And these folks that are coming into us are probably in their late 30s to early 50s with the GED. And so we're just seeing that uptick and wanted to know if there's any other organizations that have really seen that uptick and how you've worked with helping those folks achieve that GED, which is a big barrier for them to get to that living wage. So any feedback would be great.
Well, Jennifer, on behalf of, I'm Angelica Moan from the Washington County Economic Alliance in Greenville, Mississippi, and I have a lot of prime age applicants who actually come in that needs their GED. So we partner with our local community college here, which is Mississippi Delta Community College, which have an adult, it's an adult learning program that it actually helps to get your GED. So think about your local, your closest community college, because they have really been very instrumental to us in helping us, as well as the applicants who's needing their GED or needing assistance with that.
And Jennifer, I know y'all operate a youth build. We have several others in the network who offer GED preparation and education simultaneously while they're doing sort of the skill trades training that they're getting through the youth build that we'd be happy to connect you in with. I do know one of the things, and again, plugging Wednesday session, we will have Markle Foundation and the Rework America Alliance talking a little through this, especially this conversation of switching the narrative from credentials to competencies. So especially when we think about those education barriers like a GED, a high school diploma, a college education, helping people really build out a resume and a conversation with employer about what the existing skills they have. You know, when we think through some of these jobs that might exist in maritime or advanced manufacturing or agribusiness, there's lots of people who have skills that could be used in place of a credential, and how we can sort of help not only clients elevate that to an employer, but also helping employers think through that equity piece of switching a job posting from one that's credentials based to competencies based, and really figure out like what that client can do, because what we know is that largely people probably have the skills they need to perform in these jobs. It doesn't work for every sector. You know, we think about healthcare. Healthcare has lots of licensures. So it doesn't always work for that, but there's several of them that I think really can tie in back to those populations who, again, are 30 to 50. We know that they're bringing a lot of life experiences and a lot of skills to the table that maybe doesn't always get communicated because they're getting cut off way too early in the job search system because they don't have a GED or a high school diploma. And I'm seeing people are asking if we're going to share the Prezi. Yes. So this will be recorded and it will be posted as part of the generalized session. So you can go back to review this conversation or the Prezi at any time within the conference system. Anyone
Thank
else?
you.
I know, Louise, I think you had a hand raised.
Yes, I was going to mention something that bothered me during one of the many things that bothered me during the COVID outbreak and that we're still going through. I saw people that needed food not being able to access food, while I saw farmers throwing away milk and other, commodities that we should have better utilized. Schools were not open, so there were refrigerator space at some of those buildings. And I thought, as a intermediary, this might be something that you may want to take on as a more global challenge. And when this thing happens again, because it looks like we may have recurrence of COVID time to time. But I just thought it was appalling that we were throwing away food and not ready to have some systems in place to take that food and prepare it and give it away or do some other creative things with it.
Certainly.
Just a comment.
Especially the populations that we serve that require a harder equity reach. There's always been issues there around attaching to social service supports that would kind of keep them in an employment chain that certainly got exacerbated during COVID. And I think that's one of the things that are frequently being uplifted to us, especially on the sort of work-facing community-based organizations, is how do we better provide those social service supports and fund them with different streams that maybe, a lot of the conversations we're having are the WIOA Title II and the federal resources to do ... And what's really missing in some of those conversations is the basic needs that a lot of people have when they're coming to us looking for employment, and how we can more rapidly attach them to that. So I think through our financial opportunity centers, I think we're trying to figure out how do we better figure out the benefits that we can attach people to, and what are some of the sort of systems that still could plug in here in a more meaningful way to ensure we're not seeing people go hungry while they're going through a training. And we're not seeing people, lose that vision because some of their most basic needs at home aren't being met. So thank you for elevating that, Louise.
Thank you so much. Well, Justin, since it seems you want to keep talking, I have plenty of questions for you. So you had talked about shovel ready earlier on. Let me back up just a moment. First of all, thank everyone. I want to thank everyone for participating in your responses when Justin is called on you. I think there are really key critical issues, especially not only when we think about workforce development, but also just the work collectively that we do here at Rural LISC. One of the items specifically is around equity. And I know that you touched upon it in your Prezi, but I think it really, I would like for you to dig a bit deeper, if you don't mind, for a few moments, because we really know that human capital is a set of qualifications and capabilities that an individual possesses. It can be applied to a job, including education, skills, expertise, and other relevant knowledge. But using your rural lens, can you talk about how we here at Rural LISC really have put a stake in the ground around employment equity?
Yeah, I think, oh, did we have someone else? No, oh, thought I heard someone else's voice there for a second. Yeah, I think when we're having conversations around equity, there's multiple lenses to use. So I think I always try to elevate to national funders or stakeholders or thought partners that rural is a culture and not just a geography. And I think when you explain it that way, it gets harder to marginalize us. Then when we think through underrepresented populations in rural places, so whether that be women, whether that be BIPOC populations, Latinx, opportunity youth, disabled returning citizens. It's a whole new context when you talk about that at the intersection of rural. So I think that's a large part of the conversation that we're having, is making sure that a lot of these national stakeholders don't leave rural behind. Again, when we talk about places that are persistent poverty, this isn't the 80s and 90s when, you know, you had the big theory of change, like we need to go to places that are concentrated population. Oh, sorry, I think we got someone falling off a mute here and there. So train of thought, you know, we have these, this theory of change is like, we got to hit places where we can get the highest scale and the biggest ROI. And because of that, rural places really got left behind. 87% of persistent poverty counties in the United States today are rural. So if equity is in your mission when we're talking about economic development, workforce development, you have to come to rural places to sort of achieve that today. So I think that's the piece that we are consistently elevating to the surface, is if you're going to have equity in your mission or vision statement, it needs to include some sort of conversation about the rural worker.
Thank you. I know that we're getting close to time, but there are a number of individuals who are participating today who are part of the Rural Works Collaborative, our cohort. But there are also a number of individuals who are participating today who might be brand new to Rural Works. And so I'd like to really quickly just ask you, I'd like to make a statement, have you talk briefly about Rural Works, and then, but before we go today, I think that it is so powerful that you talk about some of our partners who are actually doing the work, and then also talk about, and so 3 things. Number 1 is, let's talk about Rural Works real quickly. Number 2, let's elevate our partners. But then number 3, in addition to the investment that Ascendium has made, I'd also be curious to know from you, like, how has that leveraged interest from other funders and partners around workforce development? And you're on
Yep.
mute.
So we started with an initial 11 that we felt were sort of work ready. And oftentimes in rural places, you know, it's not always a skills mismatch conversation, it's an opportunity mismatch. So we really wanted to start with the places that we thought we could hit some successes and some wins, where we saw employers sort of setting up, but we're having this sort of skill mismatch. So we set up the workforce funding collaboratives and began to make those investments around the work-facing community-based organizations, but also some post-secondary institutions. And a lot of them brought different things to the table. So I think through, again, the Elkins, West Virginia, and what they are doing with Youth Build, I think about Pastone in Puerto Rico and what they're doing with Youth Build, or our groups in Mississippi that are backboning Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, Opportunity Youth work, to Ohio, who's doing incredible like English as a second language work, then moving on to like Phoenix, Arizona, who's really working with a lot of these migrant farmers and workers who come in, and how do they transition skills. I mean, we just see so many cool things happening across rural America, but also we're quickly like got caught on with a lot of industries and philanthropic partners who were saying, yes, like I've had a knowledge gap here, but I want to invest. So we've had incredible investments from partners like Google, who came on and said, I want in. They invested in partnerships, new partnerships in Alabama, Oklahoma, and Virginia to their data centers, as they were saying, like, I am in this rural community. I have a drastic need for labor to fill these slots, but I don't know necessarily all the partners that I need to bring to the table. So they invested in the Rural Works model to sort of lead that. And it was a perfect case example of industry demanding it and saying, I will help you as long as you can pull together, you know, the community college or Mid-Industrial America Park in Oklahoma. I mean, we've really seen a lot of cool things sort of get elevated. Going back to like New York was braiding a lot of federal funding. So whether it was DOL grants. I know ETA had layered in there, but they were covering such a large geographic region that they were achieving a different scale than what we often assume can happen in rural America. And I think it goes back to this conversation of us really thinking through like regionalism within rural economies. But we saw a huge investment from Markle Foundation to sort of launch their theory of change there as well. There's other funders that we're seeing come to the table. So Microsoft, how do we layer in those digital supports to all of this? I think there was a real need and a demand from not only the local communities of like the need for resources, which I think LISC has been great at aggregating at the national level, but there were all of these people who really wanted to invest in rural places, but didn't necessarily know how to access the Jennifer Griggs of Elkin, West Virginia. They didn't know how to access the Reagans in Ohio. And I mean, that was the one thing that I think we really saw at the end of this year was there is such a knowledge trust of innovators in this space in rural places, but all of these, huge national think tanks just had no way to figure out like, how do I tap it? And I think that's the role that we're really playing at Rural Works for both ends of the spectrum is we're a dot connector at the end of the day.
I agree.
Awesome. Oh, go ahead.
I
Go ahead.
apologize. I agree. We are one of the partners, and to start off our work with Rural Works, we did the Discovery Focus Group, and we brought all of the different partners, employers, trainer sites, even healthcare, the rural health, rural education, all of the other partners that we have. And with the Workforce Development Board, one thing that we realized is when people have done things for a long time, they think it's the right thing. So the conversation helped us to communicate that though you've been operating for a long time, the grassroots, we deal with the National Farm Worker Jobs Program. The grassroots farm worker doesn't necessarily know how to access all of the benefits that the mainstream employment seeker might be able to access. So they provided us with tools for showcasing or doing resume writing or resume rewriting, job coaching. And so it helped my job coaches so that when they are accessing those employers and also working with the individuals, they have a different conversation than they were used to having. So we recognize that some people don't have high school diplomas or GEDs. So how do we communicate their skills and as including their life skills in that resume so that the employer takes a look at it? Because a lot of times when you have limited skills or limited employment in the resume, the employer thinks you really haven't done anything. If you've done seasonal farm work, and those things we were able to bring to the forefront by being a part of the coaching tool that they provided. Also, just doing follow-up with and being on the WIBs ourselves, being able to continue to ask for involvement in what this project entails. And I just wanted to speak very briefly to Louis when he was talking about growers and all of the fruits and vegetables and milk and things like that. We operate major community food pantries. And so what we started to do, because you could never reach every individual, what we started to do is reach the agencies that reach the individuals and share that we have this food, we're placing orders. And sometimes it was to get the other agency to pick it up for the person, because there's no way to definitely get around and no way for us to know, but we were able to help a lot of people. And we also were able to purchase masks, hand sanitizer, gloves, things like that with the funding that we got from rural LISC so that we're able to reach out to those people, because it's an essential worker. A farm worker is an essential worker, and they were out there in the fields, and we did lose some people because they weren't educated and informed, and definitely not well equipped with the things that they need. So if you wore these gloves today and you were out in the fields and you wore them every day, sooner or later you're going to contact something. So we educated our staff first, and so that we would be able to have those informed conversations or trainings.
And I want to put a quick pin in that, because what I love the most, like in this work, is exactly what just happened. Is what we have continued to elevate is, you know, LISC often backboned workforce development for other sort of national stakeholders. But the one thing we constantly communicated was it's really hard for there to be a strong peer-to-peer network and for there to be meaningful gleanings from the work when, you know, rural New York is sitting there having to compete with the Bay Area, Chicago, Baltimore, Atlanta. And what we said is we wanted an explicitly rural workforce development community of practice, because what they can exchange with each other is going to be what's the most valuable thing that comes out of rural works. So that sort of conversation that we can make happen between Patricia and Louise is exactly why this was started. And it's the most beautiful part of the work. And I love the fact that someone, you know, sitting where you're sitting, Patricia, can communicate with someone where Louise, if I remember correctly, I think you're from the Mid-Atlantic, if I'm recalling. But, you know, that's the best part of this work. And I think what is the really sort of like value share of rural works. So I love it. And thanks so much for contributing, Patricia.
Yeah, I'm in South Carolina. Louise
Yes,
got
okay.
theirs with
Okay.
Low country, high country.
Low country.
Low country. All right.
Well, Justin, and all of our esteemed guests, you have run the clock out. It is 12:44. We literally have it's 12:45. This has been such a robust session, not only with the information that you have provided, Justin, but really the conversation and the dialogue and the passion for all of these partners who are connected, interconnected, learning to connect, meeting new friends, where we can continue to collaborate for collective impact in rural America. Thank you to everyone for tuning in this morning. I am excited because I know this is just the beginning of a wonderful few days. So please stay dialed in. Keep your conference platform up. Go play some games. Look for the rural ducks. Look for the ducks. Win some prizes. But most importantly, do what you did this morning. And that was you paid attention to one another. You contributed. You shared information that you may have had that will help someone else. And collectively, we will continue to lift those populations in rural communities who are just as strong and just as vibrant as those who are in urban spaces. And we will just have a wonderful time together. So thank you, Justin. Thanks to everyone this afternoon.
I did just want to give people, if I could really quick, tomorrow we'll be having roundtables. We do welcome everyone to join the workforce roundtable.
Okay.
So please feel free, come ready to share, cameras on. Let's create a community as much as we can in this age of COVID and virtual.
Yes.
And then on Wednesday, please circle back with us as we welcome Walton Family Foundation and the Rework America Alliance, including Markle Foundation, into this conversation. I think it's some interesting announcements coming. We're going to tease, and a lot of fun conversation. So please feel free to come back.
Absolutely. And for those partners who are a part of our Rural Works cohort, we will look forward to seeing you shortly this afternoon, where we spend some time together and dig in with the work that you're doing specific to Rural Works. Everyone, thank you and have a wonderful morning.